Have you ever tried to make a beat where you had one idea in mind, but you ended up somewhere completely different? That's sorta what happened to me. So one morning I woke up with an idea in mind, and that idea was to make a beat. But not any old beat. What I wanted to do was make a hard beat, but with no drums. Basically, this meant no snares allowed, no kicks allowed, no claps or hi-hats. Basically, I wasn't allowed to use any of the typical drum sounds that we all use in our beats. So I had to think, what do drums provide in a beat? Typically, you include drums in your beat to provide structure, foundation, and a sense of pacing through repetitive rhythm. So if I had to make a beat without any drums, I would have to accomplish this in a different way. I knew going in what would help would be using a lot of percussion and arps from synths. With that in mind, I started off with this percussion sound here. This would be the first layer of my percussion loop that I would eventually build that would hopefully do the job that a drum loop would do. I began experimenting and playing around with the sound to really push it so it wasn't as dull. I added a couple of my favorite experimental effects on top, and now this is sounding far more interesting to me. And this wasn't the last time this technique would come in handy, as you guys will see later on in this video. Even with just this one sound, I was starting to hear it already with this one layer in my beat. I just wanted to do it so badly. Just throw in some rattling hi-hats, a snare that could crack a screen, and an 808 that could do this. But I just couldn't do it. I had to figure out a way to do this without drums. So next up, I thought I would throw in more percussion to continue building out this percussion loop. From here, I tried adding an ARP in from Omnisphere to help diversify the sounds in the beat. I liked certain sounds, but nothing really stood out to me, and it started to feel like I was just throwing in sounds for the sake of it. I tried instead to find some more percussion sounds to see if maybe adding yet another layer into my percussion loop would help, but nothing really felt like it was coming together. Again, I felt like I was just throwing in sounds because I had no other ideas in mind. So I went back to the drawing board, opened up my synth to see if I could find something, really anything that worked with my beat. At one point, I got pretty desperate. But I just could not find anything. At this point, I was starting to lose hope. But then, all of a sudden, I found the swelling synth. Everything completely changed after this. I had no interest whatsoever in making a hard beat anymore. Instead, I wanted to make a gentle, peaceful lo-fi beat now. Even that percussion loop that I came up with before all of a sudden sounded like this calming, melodic, almost tribal instrumentation. With this new idea in mind, it was time to take things in a different direction. I needed to think about the other components in my beat and introduce something more melodic. As it stood right now, the chords, as much as I did like them, were really basic. It was just a 2-chord progression after all. So I would have to figure out how to introduce something melodic elsewhere. I knew a good way of achieving this would be through my bass line. Since I wanted to make a lo-fi beat, I decided to use a bass tone that would match that aesthetic. I loaded up one of my favorite upright bass patches, and I ended up coming up with this bass line here. Things were sounding good so far. I thought it might be a good idea to continue working on the low end and filling out this area more since I was already down here. Now, since I couldn't use a kick, I had to get creative. I found a percussion sound that had a similar shape to a kick. It had a lot of attack and just enough low end presence for me to do this. After shaping the sound to isolate the low end frequencies that I needed, and then boosting those remaining frequencies up, I had my kick replacement. I didn't want to use it like a straightforward kick because I felt like that would be cheating, so I got a little melodic with it. It wasn't as clean and thumpy as an actual kick, but that wasn't the worst thing in the world. After all, I was making a lo-fi beat, so a clean and bright sound didn't really fit into that aesthetic anyways. Now at this point, I decided to try a few things out. I added some more percussion to see if that helped. But it wasn't actually what the beat needed. I thought to myself, well, adding a kick replacement was a good idea. That definitely helped fill out the beat a little bit more. Maybe I should do the exact same thing, but with a snare. I grabbed these percussive noises right here, which sounded pretty awful on their own, but once I used some creative effects, I got this. Now this would really help fill out the beat with just how dense and unique these sounds were. The beat sounded like it was really coming together now. I decided to try to add some more melodic components into the beat now. This sounded nice, but it wasn't really adding much into the beat. This almost felt like it was adding too much into the beat. This felt really close, but there was just something that wasn't working for me with this sound. I decided to play with some effects to see if maybe throwing this into a different space would help. That didn't really help, but I actually liked the way this sounded, so I decided to save it and set it aside for later on. At this point, I decided to take my own advice from a video I made a while back on how to get your beats to sound more professional, and I decided to simplify. This pattern was a bit too elaborate, it was just sitting too forward in the beat. And like I said in that video, you just can't have too many sounds be in the spotlight. So I decided to simplify the pattern and really tuck it back into the beat. At this point, I could hear there was a space missing in the beat that needed to be filled. A bit more presence was needed in that low mid-range. After all, I cut a lot of the frequencies from my kick replacement, and my bass didn't have that much color to it. I decided to duplicate my bass tone, fiddle around with the patch itself, and add some effects so my bass went from sounding like this to this. And then I decided to do the exact same thing to the percussion sounds of the beat. At this point, the beat was sounding pretty good to me. I decided to add one last layer into the beat. I took that cool shimmering effect that I was able to create with my synth before, and I used it at the beginning and the end of my loop. Be thinking it's sort of cheating how I use the percussion and I reshaped them to essentially work like drums, but I just couldn't help myself. I just like this beat way too much. And that's what happened when I tried to make a hard beat with no drums.